Krueger Show, everybody. Larry Krueger, joined by Jordan Elliot tonight from Niners Nation, one of our favorite guys talking Niner football. And happy Monday to everybody. Second show of the day. I was on earlier today on 95.7 The Game with Damon Bruce from 3 to 6. Talked to the great Michael Irvin this afternoon a little bit, and we'll be back on tomorrow with Damon, and I guess Peter King is going to stop by, so I'm looking forward to chopping it up and talking a little football with Peter King. But before we do any of that, let's talk a little football with Jordan Elliot from Niners Nation. Jordan, how are you, man?
I'm even better now, man. Getting sandwiched in between Michael Irvin and Peter King is quite the honor for me.
Exactly. Well, give me your thoughts on the 49ers. I mean, this was a game that it was good for everybody but the talk show circuit, right? Because there really wasn't that controversy. There wasn't, really the only negatives in this game to speak of were injuries. Injuries to Nick Bosa, injuries to Emmanuel Mosley, injuries to Robbie Gould. And, that really was the negative side of this game. The football side of things on both sides of the ball, I would have to say, by most people's accounts, overwhelmingly positive. What did you think? What was your takeaway?
Immediately, it was just the 49ers flexed the depth that I think so many of us thought they had going into the season. A lot of the top end, players on the roster were the same. George Kittle had been there in the past, Trent Williams, Bosa, Warner. But to me, the real big difference with this team compared to years past was how strong they were 2 through 53. And I thought we saw a great illustration of them getting that call to action and delivering. Immediately, the first thing that came to my mind was, wow, they just played a game without 4 of the 6 of their team captains, and they won by 22 points on the road. I know the Panthers stink. I know they're not a very good team, but they're still an NFL team. And to pull that off at the NFL level, to me, is just absolutely mind-boggling that you can go in, absorb losses to players like a Trent Williams, like a Nick Bosa. And while their contributions can't be downplayed, it felt like they didn't miss a beat, and they were without some of the best players in the entire sport. I just think that's phenomenal.
Let's start with Jimmy Garoppolo. He really didn't look good in the first start, and then he's gotten progressively better. I thought last week was interesting because he seemed like Kyle Shanahan. I think most of our takeaways after the Denver game was, man, this offense has no rhythm. There's absolutely no rhythm. And I was wondering, how is Kyle Shanahan going to, get his quarterback in rhythm, but at the same time, defeat the Rams with their vaunted pass rush. And sure enough, the Niners won on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They came out, despite being 55%, 45% run pass in the first 3 weeks, they came out against the Rams and they threw it all over the place. And then this week it was a more balanced attack, but still a lot of throwing. It seems like in 2 weeks, Jimmy Garoppolo has gone from inaccurate and out of rhythm to looking a lot more comfortable and in a decent rhythm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought the biggest tell was how he looked on third down. He was 8 for 9 on third down. He was averaging 13 yards an attempt. He looked much more confident. And the thing that really stood out to me, there was that ball to Ayuk where they just, it didn't end up working out. It was just out of Ayuk's reach, or he didn't turn around to get it in time. And then the ball to Coleman, both on third down, where it was nice to see him take a shot downfield with one of his receivers in a one-on-one situation and allow them to make a play on the ball. I think that that's something that at times there's been a reluctance to do, whether it was intentional or not. We just weren't seeing it. So I thought that was really encouraging. And I thought that there was just like you said, like there was a rhythm that hadn't been there before. And the last 2 weeks, he's played at a level where if you're going to get that consistently and you pair that with the way the 49ers run game's taking off, Jeff Wilson has just been phenomenal the last couple of weeks as well. The offensive line is opening up these big running lanes for him. And the defense, like it's hard to, envision them being an easy out for anybody. There are some teams where, it's going to be a more difficult matchup. Kansas City is going to be really telling, but they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the NFL if Jimmy Garoppolo is playing that way. And you have to feel confident about their chances winning that game, too, against anybody if you have him playing at that level. He doesn't have to be spectacular, but if you get that clean, 60, 63% completion percentage, 200, 240 yards and a touchdown without a pick, like that's just been a proven recipe for success as long as he's been in San Francisco. And I think that this defense is as good as it's ever been. So We've seen them get to the cusp of the Super Bowl before playing that way. I don't see why they can't do it in 2022 as well.
You know, it's funny because this team a couple weeks ago kind of reminded me of the Ravens, the 2000 Ravens, when they had Dilfer and a killer defense. And it was just like, Dilfer, don't lose the game. And in some ways, you know, I think Shanahan has kind of coached that way in the past, like maybe in 2019 even, where it was like, hey, I got a pretty good defense and I got a pretty good run game, and I'm just going to try to take the ball out of this quarterback's hands and not let him really make, win or lose the game for me. And then ultimately had to go to him and use him in the Super Bowl, and we all saw how that turned out. Do you think the defense is so good this year that they really can be like the 2000 Ravens, where it really is a situation where Jimmy just has to make a few throws and take care of the ball and they can contend for a title? Or do you think somewhere along the road he's going to have to produce at a higher level than that, and he's going to have to shoulder more of the burden?
I think inevitably there will be a game that comes, along where he's going to have to do that. And a lot of it does ride too on how serious that groin injury is for Nick Bosa. As of now, it sounds like it's more precautionary than anything. I wouldn't expect him to play in Atlanta, but as long as it's not a long-term thing that's, going to drag on as the season goes along, I think that defense is on par with any of the great defenses of the last 25 years. 2000 Ravens, 2002 Bucks, 2013 Seahawks, take your pick. I think that talent-wise, and the strength at all three levels of the defense, this team is as good as any of those. I understand all of those teams won Super Bowls, so some people might feel like that comparison is premature or they don't belong there. But if we're talking strictly talent and their ability to dominate a football game, I would put them in that conversation with any of those units. It's incredible how stacked they are. And we're even seeing later in the game, when you don't have a Nick Bosa, when you're down in Emmanuel Mosley, they still were able to just wreak havoc. And again, I understand it's the Panthers, so some people might not be moved yet, but you can't undersell how deep this unit is and how good they are beyond just that starting 11 that are on the field, and how they are able to have these guys step up week in and week out. So yes, inevitably, I do think there will be a game where Jimmy will have more on his plate. And I think that he's proven in the past, he's capable of winning those games. The one people always point to is New Orleans in 2019, that Halloween game in Arizona that same year. He has it in him. I wouldn't count on that every single week, but I do think that there will be a handful of games this year where the defense might not be only allowing 12 or 9 or 15, and they will need him to step up. And I think he's capable of doing that.
What did you think of Tevin Coleman? I mean, when I first heard that name, I was like, wow, they're going to go back to Tevin Coleman. They're really kind of scraping. But then I talked to him last week in the locker room, and I'll tell you, there's a real toughness about Tevin Coleman. That's a tough guy. I mean, you can kind of tell when you're talking to somebody who's a little bit tougher than the average guy. This guy's he's tougher and smarter. Like when you start talking to him about the game plan, he's very in tune with the game plan. He's very in tune with what he needs to do within Kyle's offense. And there's a respect for him in the room that you can kind of feel. I think his locker right is right next to Danny Gray's, and you can kind of tell that there's a respect that Tevin commands. And then he goes out there and he made that catch down the sideline. I thought that was, you call that a 50-50 ball. He just went up, over the defender and took it away. He looked really comfortable running. He looked even maybe a half step quicker than I remember him looking. Maybe it's just because he's fresh. What'd you think of Coleman?
I think that, if you look it up on Wikipedia right now, David Tepper owns the Carolina Panthers, but I feel like Tevin Coleman has some sort of ownership stake because he scored last 2 games against them. And it just feels like he absolutely owns that entire franchise. It was incredible to watch, but it wasn't surprising. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Last year, at the end of the season, somebody asked me who my comparison for Elijah Mitchell was. And I said, he is Tevin Coleman on a rookie contract. And I think that's a compliment. I think that he was somebody who he ran with that same kind of physicality. He took care of the football, and he was somebody that Kyle trusted to hand the ball off to 15, 16 times and have those, I know everybody got so enamored with those big home runs with Breida and Mostert over the years. But one thing that Coleman always brought was ball security. And just like you said, he has this toughness and this physicality where he's maybe only picking up 4 here, 6 there. But over the course of the game, you can see it really wear down a defense. And he just runs with a bit of, just oomph that I feel like a lot of other players in the league don't have at that position, even as he's getting older and he has more years under his belt. He may not be the same explosive athlete he was that Super Bowl year in Atlanta, but he still has that like tenacity, and that just the way he finishes these runs off with that level of physicality is something that I think is very endearing with Kyle. And again, I think it's the third time I've mentioned it. Ball security is so important for Kyle, and Tevin Coleman does not turn the football over. I don't think he had a single fumble that year in 2019 when he was effectively the starting running back, and he didn't again on Sunday. He just doesn't lose the football, and that goes a long way with Kyle, I think. So I would expect him to be in the fold going forward. Even when Mitchell does come back, I'd expect to see some three-headed monster of him, Mitchell and Wilson going down the stretch.
It's an interesting comparison. I kind of think of Mitchell as a little bit maybe a little bit different shaped version of Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that, he can catch it a little bit. He does not going to fumble. He finishes his runs. He's really strong. It's interesting because it's like when I watch Mitchell, I don't see the 4.3 speed that he ran at the combine. He doesn't play. I mean, even if he runs that fast, he doesn't play that way. He doesn't play to that speed, but that's neither here nor there. He's actually got incredible running back skills, pick and slide, and always falls forward and maximizes every run and doesn't fumble, as you said. And those traits are incredibly valuable, despite the fact that I don't know that we ever see 4.33 or anything even approaching that. As far as I can't picture Mitchell really running away from anybody despite that clocking. But it's interesting watching them now run the ball. We still didn't see JP Mason, but we did see Jeff Wilson Jr. And man, Jeff Wilson Jr. Now you mentioned the O-line. I thought there was one play on that long run that Wilson had where Jalen Moore just buried the whole side of the line of scrimmage. Him and Banks just moved the entire defensive right side of the line of scrimmage, and they just ran right off of Moore's backside. And it was wide open, man. I mean, it was absolutely wide open. And I saw the same thing with Burford, even though we saw Burford at times get kind of a little bit embarrassed by Aaron Donald in the Ram game, but heck, that's going to happen. But both those guys, Burford and Banks, and now even Jalen Moore, they all show well above average power and ability to pop in the run game. And to me, that's kind of the most exciting part of watching the 49ers the last couple of weeks is they've got some young O-linemen that can kind of blow you out of the hole and move you off the line of scrimmage.
Absolutely. And they not only have the power, they have the agility to move in space, especially Burford. That's something, if you go back and you watch his tape from UTSA, he was really good when they asked him to pull, and his ability to move laterally and then finish those blocks with power after coming off those lateral movements while he's pulling. I just think that right now you're willing to live with the growing pains that come with having those starting offensive linemen, because we've seen, as you mentioned, there are some times where you do see the inexperience, but the upside is so vast. And if they continue on this trajectory, when the games really start getting important, getting into November and December, you're going to have such a leg up having that the experience under their belt now, paired with the athleticism and that extra little burst you get not having years of NFL, experience wearing down your body. Because I feel like that's one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, Larry, is how much punishment offensive linemen take year after year. To me, it's the most underappreciated and over-criticized position in all the sport. So I think it's been really nice to see the last couple of weeks that people are kind of realizing how good of a spot the 49ers actually are when it comes to the offensive line. Because I remember all throughout the preseason, that was always the thing was, well, how far is the offensive line going to allow this offense to go? There's too many question marks. And I think early on, they've answered those questions, and they've been about as good as you could ask for given the circumstances.
It's funny. There was so much talk this year about the O-line, but I thought last year they were relatively naked compared to where they're at this year. Like this year, they've got Burford. This year, they've got Banks with a year of experience. This year, they've got Zakel. They've got some guys that they actually really like backing up. They just brought in the guy from Cleveland who can play all 5 spots. This year, you got Brunskill kind of sitting off to the side just in case one of the youngsters can't do it. They, to me, last year where they leaned on Brunskill and Compton on the right side of their line to try to make a run to the Super Bowl, I think they were more kind of dangling by a thread than this year. This year, they got some building blocks. It's just, and they got a hell of a coach in Forster. It's just a matter of coaching them up, getting them reps, building their confidence. And you know what I'm saying? It's like, I feel much better about the talent in the O-line room for the 49ers this year compared to last year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it, again, comes back to like the physical traits where you may have the growing pains that come with the younger player. But once you start to get that development accelerated, you get all the upside that comes with those physical gifts. Banks was a guy that I thought people they wrote off way too soon, considering we never really got a tangible sample size from him last year. I think it got overlooked that he got hurt during the preseason last year. So he lost a lot of valuable reps early on in his rookie year. And he's somebody that's been extremely impressive to me. And I think he's only going to continue to get better. And Zakelj, we haven't seen Zakelj yet, but I thought it was great you mentioned him because I think he's ultimately their long-term plan at center. I think that he's somebody who's going to slot right in. And man, if he pans out, you start thinking about what the next 5 years look like, having Burford, Banks, and Zakelj anchoring the interior with Trent Williams on the left side. It remains to be seen what they do with Mike McGlinchey. I'm a believer in him. I'd like to see them retain him if they can, but that offensive line looks like it could be, locked up for the next 3 to 4 years with a group of quality players where, again, it's kind of like the defense. There's not a glaring weakness on that line where teams are going to be highlighting in meeting rooms week after week. All of them can kind of pull their own weight. And I think that that's really valuable. Yeah,
the kid from Fordham is tough. He's smart. He's aggressive. So once he gets out on the field, I think it's going to be fun to watch. We got this one from Calbo. Says, is Jordan always in a car? How does he have such great internet connection in his vehicle?
I'm just getting off work, so I didn't want to hold you guys up or hold Larry up. I don't know if I'd have time to get back to my apartment. So, yeah, that's why you guys have caught me off work the last couple of times. So
there you go.
I guess
you're a hardworking guy. All right, let's jump to the big question coming out of this game, which is the loss of Emmanuel Mosley. I mean, it's funny. Rye describes the 49ers as kind of like a game of Jenga where, you pull out a piece and this guy gets hurt and that guy, and it's like, when's the whole thing going to topple down? Emmanuel Mosley is a key loss for the 49ers. He was just playing at such a high level. Not only do we see the pick six, but he's incredible against the run. He's become a very physical corner who will really hit you. And he's as respected as any guy on the entire team. You saw, I would say 20 guys come over to him on the sidelines because they knew, even though he was walking off the field, that could have been a season ender. And he's in his final year with the 49ers. There's that emotional side to the whole thing. What's his future hold? But internally, Kyle Shanahan, demonstrated today at the presser, he's got a lot of respect for Jason Verrett. That, they think Verrett's a Pro Bowl caliber corner if he's healthy. So if he's healthy, he's the guy. But he might not be healthy, and at least he might not be healthy for a few weeks. How do you view the loss of Mosley? How do you think they'll juggle things going into Atlanta?
I think that it's going to be a tall ask to ask Verrett to come in right away and play in Atlanta. I think they're better off kind of if the health is in that trending in that direction, getting him ready for Kansas City. So I would imagine, they had Womack actually playing outside on a couple snaps when I went back and watched the defensive tape today towards the end. I would imagine it's going to be him or Thomas, but, it's going to be hard because the drop off from Mosley to these younger guys is significant. And it's not an indictment on the younger players as much as it's an illustration of how good Mosley has been and how much better he's gotten year after year after year since coming in. And I just think that that's something that they can scheme around for now because of how strong the rest of the secondary is. In the short term, you might see some bumps in the road if teams are targeting that side of the field. We saw what it looked like last year once they had Mosley and Verrett go down. It wasn't pretty till they kind of got things under control. But you're right. I agree with everything that you said. And I think that the biggest loss, honestly, Larry, is going to be the run defense. I think Jason Verrett will, if he's healthy, will, kind of fill that void when it comes to coverage. And he's proven that he's a Pro Bowl caliber player when healthy. But man, if you watch week after week, some of these hits that Mosley's laying on receivers that are running these crossing routes in front of him when he's sitting in zone or when he's setting the edge against the run, he is so physical because, he looks like he's a big guy. He looks kind of, I don't want to say tall and wiry, but I don't think people understand how physical he is when they see him because he looks like kind of a taller, leaner player. He had a hit against McCaffrey where McCaffrey tried to get to the edge against him where he just dropped his shoulder and he stonewalled McCaffrey in the open field one-on-one. And I think that's where you're going to have the hardest time replacing Mosley right now are the younger corners going to be able to have that same level of awareness, instinct, and physicality if teams are, not necessarily only running to that side, but, screens, things like that short passing game in that area of the field. That's what I would watch more so than having the top taken off the defense, or getting blown by a one-on-one if they're, in man coverage or something like that.
Well, I mean, they have options here. They could go to Verrett. They could go to Dante Johnson. Dante Johnson's on the practice squad. They could go to Ambry Thomas. They could go to Womack, play him outside. They could go to Lenore and play Womack at the slot. I mean, personally, I think Womack's a starting caliber corner, but he is a young player. It is asking a lot. The answer is to probably just rotate guys through, but I think that one's going to be really interesting to watch. How about Jimmy Ward? Jimmy Ward got a broken hand. He hurt it on the kickoff. And it's just amazing at the bad luck that he has. If you're D'Amico, you want him playing with the club, or have you seen enough from Tayshaun Gibson to say, you know what, Jimmy, sit this one out. Don't play with the club. Get that hand a few weeks and we'll go with Gibson.
I think this is an easy out, but I think it honestly comes down to what's the re-injury risk with the club. If there's no concern about re-injuring it, absolutely. I'd love to have Jimmy Ward out there. I think Jimmy Ward with, one capable hand is better than a lot of safeties in the league with both. And not only what he brings in the back end of the defense, but his ability to spin down, match up with tight ends, slot receivers. It's extremely valuable. So I would like to have him out there in that instance. But if there is a concern that there could be a risk of re-injury, I would rather have Gibson out there for now because I think he's more than earned the trust of Ryans and the rest of this defense. But I would also want to look at the long term where if you do get into the backstretch down the season and you are matching up with, teams like Kansas City, which is, it's coming up soon, but like hypothetically you're playing a Kansas City or the Rams again, and you have a Cooper Kupp or a Travis Kelce, I would love to see a scenario where you can spin Jimmy Ward down into the slot and you still have Verrett and Mooney Ward on the outside. Because I think that's where the 49ers really will be at their best later in the season. If you do get a healthy Verrett, you have Hufanga, you have Gibson playing that too high, and the ability to then spin Jimmy Ward down and match up with those slot receivers and those star tight ends we're seeing all over the league now. I just don't know how you game plan for that as an offensive coordinator in this league. That would keep me awake at night all week trying to figure out how I would exploit that secondary because there really is no weakness with the way that Gibson and Hufanga have been playing so far in Ward's absence.
Yeah, and Mooney Ward's playing great, and he's a huge-bodied corner. I personally think Charvarius might be their best corner since Dion. I mean, he really looks good, and he just smothers receivers out there. Man, Garoppolo, you can say what you want about, Garoppolo's flaws, and I have and will continue to, but man, you got to credit him for some toughness. He had Marquise Haynes and Brian Burns both bearing down on him, and he just stared it down, held onto the ball, could have gotten rid of it earlier, and eventually did get rid of it. It happened to, he stared down, free rushers a couple times the last couple of weeks. He had Donald coming after him. This last game, Haynes and Burns were both in his lap, and he took a big hit, and he still delivered the ball down the field. The courageousness of Garoppolo, I would imagine, is one, and his ability and his willingness to hang in there and let his receivers work free down the field and take that big hit, not turn it down. I think that's got to be one of the reasons he's a popular guy in the room.
Absolutely. And I think it's super underrated. And I think it's something that the football world values maybe more than like football fans. I think that's one of the reasons why so many people were so enamored with Joe Burrow early on in his NFL career because of his toughness. He was getting beat up behind that awful offensive line in Cincinnati. And when you hear like former coaches or players talking about him, it was always about the toughness and how gritty he was and his ability to stand tall in the pocket and get just absolutely leveled, but getting the ball out and standing tall and absorbing that punishment that comes with that. And I think that that's an area where Garoppolo has been kind of it's been overlooked when we evaluate his game as a whole. I remember last year, I think it was that game against the Rams at home on Monday night. He had a couple throws where he delivered a ball in a tight window and he got absolutely just rocked by a free rusher coming at him. And, you know, he played through the torn ligament. He played through the shoulder last year. I do think that there's a level of toughness with him. And I do wonder, you know, genuinely how much of it comes back to, you know, he's not exactly the poster child of what you'd imagine, you know, a tough, rugged football player to be. Everybody always talks about how handsome he is. And he's this, you know, the GQ model and all his endorsement deals and stuff like that. But he really is a tough quarterback. And I think you're right. I think that that does go a long way within the football, you know, brain trust in the building and around the league, where there is a level of respect and admiration for Jimmy because of his toughness that the players and coaches have, that a lot of fans either don't have or probably just overlook, again, because I think a lot of it really just comes down to optics. When you look at Jimmy Garoppolo, he doesn't scream, you know, he's not like Dick Butkus or one of these guys back in the day, you know, they're missing a tooth and they look like this rugged football player. I think a lot of it really comes down to that, you know.
Here's a question. This is more of a barroom discussion, but we were getting into it the other day. It's 3rd and 8, 49ers offense is on the field and the Super Bowl's on the line. And you gotta get that 8 yards. And you're going to throw the ball. You're not going to run it. Who are you going to throw it to? Who do you want to throw it to? 3rd and 8 with the season on the line. And I bring this question up because Debo's their biggest star, but Debo is a mismatch with the ball in his hands. His receiving skills are good, but are they spectacular? I don't know. I mean, they're good. Ayuk is a guy that seems like he can really pluck the ball with his hands. And so it's like, you know, but then there's times where, you know, it's like he's not as dependable. Then there's George Kittle, who you know is going to fight for it. And then there's Juwan Jennings. And I said Juwan Jennings. And I just think that Juwan Jennings has got unbelievably strong hands. He also kind of acts the way I would want a receiver to act if I was playing quarterback. When the ball's in the air and it's coming his way, he like takes it personal. And to me, there's just something I know the other guys would all be considered better, but if my season's on the line, and I got 3rd and 8 and I'm the 49ers, I'm throwing it to Juwan Jennings. Well, who are you throwing it to?
I think that you make a very compelling case, and I don't think it's as outrageous as maybe some people might make it out to be. I personally would go with Brandon Ayuk. I think Brandon Ayuk's ability to separate his hands and his ability after the catch, he's somebody who I think just has the most complete package, and somebody who in that moment I would rely on that skill set more than anything. But at the same time, Jennings makes a very strong case because it felt like every single 3rd or 4th down, or when they were in the red zone, when the season was on the line on that amazing run they had, it felt like every single time it was Juwan Jennings making a play. And you know, it's close, but I would probably lean Ayuk. I think that he has the most dependable hands paired with the best skill set to free himself up. If it was a situation where he's matched up in some kind of coverage where he has to win and he has to get that separation and Kyle's scheme isn't doing it, he has to win individually. I just think Ayuk is the guy that I would rely on in that moment.
Frank says, throw it to the open guy. Frank, you cheater. Don't be a cheater, Frank. We got this guy saying Blackquiza, Jennings for sure. It's interesting that neither of us went with Debo.
You know, I think you nailed it. Debo Samuel is, with the football in his hands, there's like a list of, you know, everybody does it differently, but I'm just thinking in my lifetime, like players that I've seen with the ball in their hands where it just like wowed me at the NFL level. It's like Michael Vick, LaDainian Tomlinson, Lamar Jackson, and like Debo Samuel are in their just this own realm of, they all win in different ways, but it just I never cease to be amazed watching the way that Deebo Samuel wins with the ball in his hands. But at the same time, he was targeted 9 times and had 2 receptions in Carolina. And if you go back and you watch, he probably should have had 5 or 6 catches. He dropped a few. And
Yeah, he did. He had 2 or 3 drops.
At times, I don't want to sit here and undersell Deebo Samuel, but I just think that there are times where the hands can be an issue. And I think at times Kittle has that problem as well. And that's where I would lean Ayuk, because I just think that Ayuk out of the 3 is the most dependable when it comes to, especially when he's running these glance routes and these quick slants over the middle in traffic. It's like he snatches that ball out of, he just has it's like he has the stickum built into his hands, like he's somebody where I trust in that moment. Like my level of trust would be much higher just based on the fact that I think his hands are more reliable. And again, like George Kittle and Deebo Samuel are superstar all pro level players, but I think football at every level is fundamental. And it comes down to things like who has the best hands in a situation like that. And I just think it's Ayuk.
Yeah. Anonymous is correct. Jordan Ayuk is the 49ers best receiver. I just think it's interesting. I'll say that, you know what, the truth be told, there's also, we need more information, because I'll let you say this. After watching Denver, I ain't going to the receiver that Surtain's on. After watching the Rams, maybe I'd go opposite Ramsey. You know what I mean? There's a few corners in this league that, I might want to go the other way just because they're that good. And those two come to mind. All right. How about this? Who is the biggest talent among Niner linebackers? Who's the biggest talent?
It's still Fred, right? It's got to be Fred.
It's Fred?
Right? Yeah, I think it's got to be.
Greenlaw the last 2 weeks is flying all over the field, playing with just a crazy breakneck pace, flying up, whether you catch it, whether you're the runner. He's throwing his body around with reckless abandon. I know most people would agree with you, but man, it's close. It's very, very close.
I think it's a great problem to have on your team if you're debating who the best linebacker on your team is. I thought at times last year, so I think it's Fred, but I will say that last year there were a couple weeks where I thought Azeez Al-Shaair was the best linebacker.
I know.
So I can see how somebody might feel that way about Greenlaw this year, and especially since he signed that extension, it's like his game has gone to a different level. But for me, the thing that not only separates Warner from Greenlaw, but separates Fred Warner from every single other linebacker in the NFL, and the reason why I think he's the best, is his ability to completely erase other teams' top slot receivers, tight ends, number 1 wideouts. Like when he's tasked with carrying an elite athlete 30 yards upfield and completely erases them out of a quarterback's progression, I've never seen anything like that from a linebacker. And he still can, excel fitting against his, filling his run fits. He's really good. He had a really nice pressure on a stunt where he had Baker Mayfield. He grabbed him by the shoulder and he threw an errant ball to McCaffrey in the flat because Warner hit him. He was credited with a sack in the game too, although it was one where I thought Amenahue should have been credited personally. But, the box score says he got it. So he does everything so well. It would have to be Fred for me still there. And it takes nothing away from Greenlaw, but Fred Warner's like, I've never seen a linebacker play the way Fred Warner does. And I think it'll be a long time before we see another linebacker like Fred Warner that's able to do all of the things he does on a football field, especially when we talk about what he does in coverage.
Fred is probably the most trustworthy, I would say. They're all good, man. Heck, did you see at the very end of this game, the sack by Demetrius Flanagan-Foles? I mean, He's flying at the quarterback and detonated in his lap. That was an unbelievable. I mean, they're so stacked that I'm a believer, like a real believer, in Marcelino McCrary Ball as a player. I know that kid's a player. He hasn't seen the field. And he told me that he came here, even though he knew this was the best linebacking core in the game, because he said, I want to learn from the best. How about that? Most guys would say, hey, man, tell my agent, I want to go anywhere, get me on the field the soonest. I don't care where I go. Send me to Detroit. Send me anywhere. I just want to play and I want to get on the field. And it doesn't matter where. This guy's like, I want to play for the Niners because they got Warner and Greenlaw and Azeez, and they got these incredible linebackers, and I want to run with them because I want to be like them. And then talking to McCrary Ball, he's like, I know I'm as good as those guys. I just need an opportunity. I'm telling you, wait for that kid. He's special too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he was really impressive. And I think that the 49ers have had such success laying this blueprint out where they get these guys who are either converted safeties or they play some kind of hybrid role on the far hash in college where the hashes are much wider. And, like the Greenlaw, former safety, Flanagan Fowles, former safety, Warner played that kind of hybrid safety linebacker role at BYU, McCrary Ball, converted safety. Like they've had so much success. And I think a lot of that just comes down to finding this perfect balance of they're big enough to still bang at the line of scrimmage, but they have the instincts to play in the open field and they have that sideline to sideline speed. So yeah, once I took a look into McCrary Ball's background and I saw that, I'm like, man, he looks like he's poised to be the next one. I talked to Aziz Al-Shair a couple weeks ago, and I asked him like, hey, have you kind of, had the chance to talk to Marcelino a little bit and let him know that, you were in that position where you came up and, Fred Warner and Quan Alexander are on this team his rookie year, and you kind of carved out a starting role where it took some time and it took some patience. And he's like, oh man, I tried to bring all these young linebackers under my wing and I tried to give them, the best guidance that I can. So it's nice to see that not only McCrary Ball is coming seeking that knowledge, but the players who are there are willing to give it out too. And I think getting Johnny Holland back was so big for that group too. So they're the best linebacking core in football. And it's incredible when you think about guys like Flanagan Fowles and McCrary Ball aren't seeing the field yet. But a year from now, 2 years from now, they could be the topics of these discussions when we're talking about best linebacker on the team. So it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out for sure.
Man, I'm getting old. I remember Johnny Holland at A&M. That's a long time ago. Johnny Holland was a hell of a linebacker at A&M. I also, feel like I'm getting old from the standpoint of I've watched the Niners since guys like Tim McDonald and played safety and Chet Brooks and Jeff Fuller. All those guys right now would be awesome weak side linebackers. You know what I mean? They're all safeties in that era, but in this era, they'd be weak side linebackers. All right, here's a tough question that we were talking about. Who is the most underrated great 49er? The 49er who's great, but just like really maybe you know it and I know it and nobody else really knows it.
Like, are we talking like all
that kind of guy? Well, no. I mean, I was thinking now. I was thinking that we were talking about this just like the other day. We were talking about this roster, and we started talking about underrated guys, and we realized the list was really long. There's a lot of guys on this team that are underrated. But then we got into who is truly underrated, who's like spectacular, but nobody really notices. And I know the guy that I'm thinking of, and he makes at least 2 or 3 plays a game where I'm like, wow, this guy's spectacular. And nobody ever would call this guy spectacular, I don't think. I mean, there'd be a million guys mentioned before they would say this guy.
I normally anytime a question like this is posed, I immediately take the chance to talk up Kevin Givens because I think he's been that guy for some time. But I'll be honest, the last couple of weeks, somebody who's really stood out to me who I don't think gets enough credit is Hassan Ridgeway. I think Hassan Ridgeway has done such a good job eating blocks on the interior, fitting gaps, just absolutely making it, I don't say impossible, but extremely difficult to run against. I thought Carolina had more success running the ball against the Niners than really any team this season. Denver had a lot of volume, but just in terms of the eye test the first time, and they still only averaged 3.8 yards a carry. And I just think that Ridgeway is a guy who you brought in to kind of be your fourth interior defensive lineman and who's obviously had to step up with the absence of Kinlaw and Armstead. He's playing at such a high level right now. And I think that he's somebody who won't get that credit because it's not, it doesn't fill talk show time to talk about the big nose tackle that's eating double teams and stuff. But, pick him or Kevin Givens, either of the two. I just think that I've spent, and a lot of people are catching on to Kevin Givens. I spent a ton of time talking about him. I wanted to give Hassan Ridgeway some love because I think he's been absolutely fantastic.
I didn't realize Ridgeway was a Bay Area guy. Did you know that?
I did not. Where's he from originally? I didn't know that.
He told me, but I forget. He I think East Bay, but I didn't realize. I'm like, hey, I thought of him as a Texas guy. I go, are you from Texas? He's like, no, man, I'm from here, and this is why I wanted to come here because I'm from here, and it's cool to be coming home and playing for the Niners. So I thought that was cool. His bull rush is so strong. I was gonna say the guy that I think is just super underrated is Samson Ebukam. I mean, Ebukam is now he's strong enough to bull rush you. he's fast enough to dip the shoulder and just go right around you. And we've seen him now flash that dip move a couple times where the O-linemen just panic and they just tackle him to the ground. And then he gets a penalty. It gets a holding penalty. Got one yesterday. Got one, I think, 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was 3 weeks ago against Denver. But, I mean, this guy is just – we talk so much about Bosa and, other guys, Armstead and Kinlaw. Samson Ebukam is just the motor, the first step quickness, the strength. He can beat you with speed. He can beat you with power. He now has moves. It seems like – something clicked for him, Jordan, in the second half of last year, and he carried that momentum into this year. And man, I talked to him a couple times in the last few weeks, and it's just like, this guy's just kind of expects to be there. He's not drawing double teams. He's really happy about that. He's like, hey man, I don't draw any double teams. It's like a beautiful thing. But now we're starting to see him beat guys with his initial move to the point where they just tackle him to the ground. And when O-linemen are tackling you, man, you beat them and they have nothing left. So to me, Ebukam is just, he's a freaky athlete. And I saw him at Eastern Washington and I thought to myself, man, this guy's incredible off the edge. Then the Rams got him and they put him in a defense where he was like a stacked linebacker. And he kind of looked like, like almost like a fish out of water. And then I was wondering, maybe he's not an NFL, maybe he's just too small to be an NFL defensive end. But in this wide 9 opposite Bosa on this line with all these other guys where he can play him in a rotation, I mean, Ebukam is just absolutely incredibly valuable.
He had a rep. I wish I could remember the timestamp. I had a chance to skim through the defensive film before I came to work today. He had a rep where he was on his knees, still engaged with a blocker, and he drove a 300 some odd pound offensive lineman into the ground from his knees. And I was just sitting there like, that kind of strength is just, everybody in the NFL is strong, but there are some guys that are just like in a stratosphere above everyone else. And I think Ebukam is in that mold, especially if we're talking pound for pound for a guy his size. And I agree with you. I think that the thing that ultimately clicked for him last year was just getting experience and time. It was a completely new system. He wasn't used to having his hand in the dirt. They're having him, transition from this 3-4 backer to now he's, hand in the dirt, 5 tech, wide 9. Like it's going to take some time. And I think that once he got comfortable and got into a rhythm, he hasn't looked back since. And I think that it's very interesting. I remember there was a time this past offseason when people were talking about him as like a cap casualty, maybe to free up some space. And I'm still looking at like $7 million or something like that. That's a steal for the production they got last year. If it continues, if he keeps playing the way he's playing, he potentially could be one of the biggest bargains in the NFL this season with what he's able to contribute. And I just think that having that level of versatility as an athlete has also shined against the run. I know a couple weeks ago he was number 1 among edge rushers and outside backers in run stop win rate. I'm not sure if he still is. I haven't checked, but there are plays too where he's just destroying tackles, setting the edge and stuffing these runs at or near the line of scrimmage in a way where Bosa's already criminally underrated in that field too. You have 2 of the best run defending edge rushers in the league, and they're earning that right to get after the passer on third down. So it's like he's like the perfect complement to what they have in Bosa as that foundational blue chip talent. There's no way they can let him go. They got to find a way to keep him for the next couple seasons at bare minimum.
Yeah, no, he's a perfect fit and a great guy too. Great attitude, great approach to the game. MF in the chat says, you guys talked to Tim Ryan about the D line. I'd love to talk to Tim. I have talked to Tim Ryan about the D line. And we are going to try to get Tim on the show here. I've yet to go up and ask him, but I will, because Tim's absolutely one of my favorites. MF. I love talking ball with Tim. Okay. Here's one that came up this weekend. 2 really long kickoff returns and a blocked kick. Is the special teams going to be, I mean, the Niners did everything in their power to change their special team fortune. They brought in George Odom. They brought in Ray McLeod. They brought in a new coordinator. They've invested money into this. I mean, is the special teams ever going to be a strength, or is it just, what do you make of their special teams coming out of this game? That, to me, that's kind of a little bit of a concern. Now you got your kicker hurt. Who knows? He had to make 2 tackles. He banged his shoulder. He banged his knee. They're calling it a contusion. I guarantee you Robbie Gould is not feeling good today. I don't know if they're going to bring in kickers tomorrow to work out in West Virginia in advance of the Falcon game. Is the special teams unit solved and it was just a blip, or is this going to be a continuing problem?
For now, I'm willing to, concede that it was probably a blip just based on the fact that they were really good. I actually wrote an article following the Denver game about how good they had been on special teams and how their coverage units had been amongst the best in the league. And you saw Oren Burks and George Odom really shining in that area. The blocked kick, I'm not a kicker, and I would love if anybody has experience kicking or knows more than myself about it to correct me if I'm wrong, but it looked like Tabor Pepper did a good job holding his block. You're supposed to, the way you're coached up to. It just felt like the ball didn't get the trajectory that it needed to clear the line. It didn't look like something where a defender blasts through the line of scrimmage, or like last year when Jordan Willis, punched down the block to free up for Jimmy Ward to block that kick in Green Bay. Like, it wasn't a technical failure where there was a clear error by somebody blocking on that blocked field goal. It just looked like a situation where maybe Robbie Gould needed a little bit more clearance on the ball to get it up and over the line. So again, I'm no expert when it comes to kicking, but it didn't look to me like it was on the unit. It just felt like, hey, Robbie Gould kind of had a lower trajectory than he probably should have on that kick, and it ended up getting blocked. And then it felt like that game a couple of years ago. I think it was the COVID year, if I remember correct. If it was the COVID year of 2019. Do you remember that game in New Orleans when Marquez Callaway felt like he had a big kickoff return every single time the Niners kicked the ball back to the Saints? It felt like they were starting at their own 40, 45-yard line because Marquez Callaway was just ripping off these big returns. And I think it was Blackshear for the Panthers.
Yeah, Blackshear.
The point where it's like,
maybe he's hot.
I know that Robbie Gould doesn't have the biggest leg, but it's just they're kicking off from the 35, kicking it out of the back of the end zone, man. Like, it just feels like that's an area where I don't feel like there is a single NFL team that can justify not having a kicker or punter on the roster that can just kick the ball clear out of the end zone. You don't have to worry about kickoff coverage. They're going to start where they're going to start on, that touchback, but I would much rather live with that than trying to, gain that extra couple yards, kicking it to the 2-yard line and making him run it back and deal with the coverage. The defense is so good. And I felt like that ultimately, it's just statistical stuff. They still won, and that's all the players are going to care about. But that kind of had an effect on how that defense will be perceived when you look at box scores. Because if Carolina doesn't start 2 drives at midfield, I don't think they clear 10 points in that game. I don't think that they get that touchdown they got on the opening drive of the second half. I think that you put this defense that's doing so much of the, carrying the load so far in a bind when you're putting them in these short fields. And I would just much rather see a scenario where you just have them starting out with a touchback, kick it out of the back of the end zone. Don't even have this be a concern. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, Larry, but it feels like at times they are kind of setting up to have them run it back from the 1 and try to get them inside the 20 and have that, field position start. And it was working for the most part early on. They actually had this, I think it was the second farthest average starting field position for opponents on kickoffs, but you can't risk losing Robbie Gould, and you can't let the special teams be what's holding back this team. So I'm with you. I just think it's something that for now it's okay, but they got to find a way to make sure it's not a persistent issue going forward.
Baker Mayfield went up top in the fourth quarter of this game to DJ Moore, and Emmanuel Mosley went up and then landed awkwardly and tore the ACL. And there was George Kittle afterwards talking about turf. I hate talking turf. I really do. I really hate talking turf. I hate blaming things on turf, but I don't get it either. I don't understand why in a sport where it's been proven for years that grass surfaces are more forgiving than the turf, and it's an industry that's as healthy as any industry in America. I mean, how many industries in America can point to their revenue pie and say it goes up by billions annually? And that's the NFL. I mean, it's amazing to me that they just kind of, they're kind of torn between this like moment in time where they're tied to their mom and pop roots. And then they're also advancing as this, going to be the biggest sport in the world. And they're $1 billion, $20 billion industry. It's like, have we outlived turf? Or do you blame the Mosley injury on turf? And what's your thought on turf? I mean, should the NFL outlaw AstroTurf and just make all the fields grass fields, no matter the cost? There's also, of course, all the inconvenience in trying to prep these fields throughout the year when they're grass instead of turf. I know turf's easier, but come on. I just think to see turf in 2022 with as valuable as the athletes are and as much money as there is within the sport, it's one of those things that I think has outlived its usefulness. It's like the equipment version of the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think at this point, the only justification is if you play inside a dome, like you're going to need AstroTurf. Like that to me makes sense. But for a team like a stadium like Carolina, there's absolutely no excuse to have AstroTurf. MetLife in New York, I remember that was the House of Horrors a couple of years ago with the injuries.
Right.
There's absolutely no excuse for it. And if it gets to the point where the league needs to step in, because I agree with you, like I'm not sitting here, playing my little violin for these billionaire owners that are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year from the TV contracts alone, before even getting into what they're making with gate revenue, merchandise, and all that. If it needs to get to the point where the NFL has to step in and allocate a certain amount of funds to just keep up grass fields on 32 stadiums a year, they need to do that, because ultimately their product is nothing without the players that are on those playing surfaces. And at a certain point, they need the lip service needs to, the actions need to speak louder than words. And you need to do something that's going to protect these players and their longevity. And I think that the cost of having that upkeep for 32 grass fields, 365 days a year, is much more palpable than right now the NFL might not care about an Emmanuel Mosley, but if a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen goes down because of an AstroTurf surface, all of a sudden their bottom line is going to start hurting. And I think, unfortunately, Larry, that's when you'll see a change like that happen, when it is a needle moving, player that gets hurt under the circumstances, and it's not right. It should be across the board. These players should all be treated equally. Unfortunately, as we've seen, beyond just stuff like that, even when it comes to throwing flags, there's favoritism within the NFL. And I just think that until something like that happens, and I hope it never does, but that's what it's going to take for the NFL to take some kind of action like that. But realistically, there's absolutely zero excuse unless you're playing in like New Orleans where they're in the Superdome, or I think Atlanta's in a dome.
What do you think of this one though? NorCal Collector says Arizona's got a dome, but the field is mobile to go outside for sunlight.
Yeah, I think Vegas does the same thing, if I recall correctly. Yeah, stuff like that. There's no excuse for it. This isn't a dying sport where the owners are hurting for money and the league's about to fold. It's a booming industry. And even at Levi's, we've seen, since Levi's is open, the drastic change. And when it was one of the worst playing surfaces in the NFL, and now George Kittle saying it's the best in the NFL. So I think that at a certain point, owners need to do what's right. But I think if we sit around waiting for 32 billionaires to do what's morally right rather than what's in their best financial interest, we're going to be sitting around waiting for a long time. So I think ultimately the NFL needs to step in and do something where they're allocating funds to some sort of collective pot that does go into the upkeep of grass fields. So there is no penny pinching excuses for not providing a quality playing surface for these players.
And then the other argument I see is, hey, NBA doesn't have certain kinds of wood floors that are different than other wood floors. They're all basically the same. So if that's the case, why couldn't they make these fields more standard? This just seems to be an area where the NFL needs to adjust. And, they have all these little things. Hey, he was working at Krueger's on Wednesday, and on Sunday he's playing in the NFL. And everybody's like, oh, isn't that funny? Well, it's not really funny, because it's like, it's a connection to when the sport was mom and pop, but now it's graduated beyond that. And so now there's no real need for that. And I just think this is another area where they should advance. Okay, here's another one that gets me. Just a couple more minutes with Jordan Elliot before we let him go. Kyle Shanahan was asked again today at the presser by one of my favorite media people about the injuries. And there was a stat that came across. The 49ers are, I think, the second most injured team to the Ravens. Fair or foul to hold Kyle Shanahan's feet to the fire on his team's relative injury rate compared to other teams' relative injury rate? Is that fair or foul? Is that a fair line of questioning that he should have to answer for and have concrete data to back up whatever he says? Or come on, we're talking about injuries in a sport where it's 100% injury sport. And to sit there and point fingers at Kyle for tactics that he has that the media thinks are leading to these injuries or may suspect are leading to these injuries, that crosses a line and kind of is, I don't know, I'm not unprofessional, but just kind of, are we barking up the wrong tree? Fair or foul to kind of, ask Kyle repeatedly about his team's relative health?
I think it's fair to ask, but I also just think that it's foul to assume that there's something that Kyle Shanahan's doing differently than 31 other NFL coaches that are leading to these injuries. I think a lot of it just is unfortunate circumstance that comes with playing the sport. And, it's like that old adage, like, it's not the best team that wins the Super Bowl, it's the healthiest. Like, so much of playing this sport at this level does come down to injury luck. The 49ers have just been on the bad side of it. If you go back to 2019, while they did have some injuries during the season, Bosa had the sprained ankle right away in camp, and they missed Staley and McGlinchey for a few weeks of the year. DJ Jones was out towards the end of the season, but they were a relatively healthy team, and I think that played a major role in them having that Super Bowl run. So I think it's easy to look at 2020 and look at some injuries last year and look at now, but it's just, Trent Williams rolling his ankle in Denver. Like, how's that on Kyle Shanahan? Like, Emmanuel, I know people always talk about, they need to pull starters. I think if I recall correctly, that injury happened with, still a decent amount of time left in the fourth quarter, and it was a 2-score game. And there's only a certain amount of players dressed. So, I've seen one of the biggest criticisms, Larry, is that, they leave starters out there too long. In the NFL, you only have a certain amount of players dressed. You're going to have to leave a certain amount of your players on the field. So even if you take out, a Nick Bosa or a Fred Warner, you can't just plug in at every single position. It's not the NBA where you can empty your bench in a blowout in the fourth quarter. And I think that that's an area where I've seen Kyle Shanahan criticize the most, where I would say it is the foulest, because it just doesn't align with logic and reason, because the numbers just don't add up with the amount of players who are fitted for a game. The only thing that I would say that maybe there's a fair line of questioning, and honestly, none of us really know, you'd have to hear directly from a player or coach willing to speak about it, is in closed practices, are there more, is there more of a level of physicality going on than is necessary? I remember reading, it was before my time, but I remember reading about Bill Walsh, where he said, I really didn't care about what the guys did during the week in terms of having pads on and hitting each other, as long as they showed up on Sunday and they were ready to do it. And I don't know if Kyle subscribes to that same theory, because I remember there was that receiver, I think his name was Finke or something like that. Do you remember a couple of years ago?
Chris Finke, from Notre Dame.
Where he was saying that the Niners practice harder and more physically and in pads more than any other team. So again, I don't know if that's any direct correlation, but that to me would be kind of the only fair area of questioning, where are you doing too much in these practices? Are you at a point where you have so much veteran leadership on this team? Do they really need those physical reps like that, Wednesday through Friday? I understand maybe if you're a younger football team, but I think the most important thing is just mentally being prepared and having that gameplay. Trent Williams doesn't need to go out there and block Nick Bosa Wednesday through Friday. You know what I mean? Guys like that, they're going to show up ready to go on Sunday. How much you're going to get out of Kyle, as you know very well, asking a question like that, you're probably not going to get much, but that's a fair line of questioning. But I don't think it's fair to just be Kyle Shanahan's the root cause of all these obscene injuries happening to the 49ers.
Yeah, unless you have real data, I would be very, very careful about pointing the finger at the head coach on this one. Michael Irvin today said Philadelphia, Dallas, and the Niners, that's what the NFC is about. He doesn't believe in Green Bay. Green Bay just lost to the New York Giants. He's not a big believer in Tampa Bay, nor anybody else for that matter. If there is anybody else, I guess the Rams, because the Rams lost to Dallas. But he says the NFC is going to come down to Philly, Dallas, or the Niners. You agree?
I think that you can never count out Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, but right now I can see how Michael Irvin would feel that way. I think Dallas's defense, people are not giving them enough credit for what they've done. And, I know a lot of it's been, hey, Cooper Rush is undefeated, and they're talking about replacing him or Dak. No offense to Cooper Rush. The reason that's even a discussion is because that defense is the only other defense, including the 49ers, that hasn't allowed over 20 points. They've been absolutely fantastic. I think they've only allowed 9 trips into the red zone by opponents in 5 games. That's just phenomenal. I think Micah Parsons right now is, neck and neck with Nick Bosa for Defensive Player of the Year. I think they're both a mile ahead of everybody else. So I can see how you would feel that way. But, again, that comes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, the Niners feasibly can match up with anybody. I think when you start talking about potential AFC opponents, it gets a little bit more nuanced. But yeah, I agree. I think as of right now, the main thing I'd be watching there, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, is what is Philadelphia going to do when they play a team that has a really stout run defense? Because they've gotten really creative with a lot of the looks they're running with Jalen Hurts and a lot of that spread offense out of the shotgun. But what are they going to do against a defense that is going to be able to stop them? And I think Dallas definitely has what it takes. So that'll be an interesting matchup this week. Philly is really, 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 really good in the trenches. They are very stout on both sides of the ball. They probably have the best offensive line in football. I'm just not sold yet. I need to see more, and I need to see them against some quality opponents before I really, have them as the class of the NFC, even at that 5-0 record. Right now, like, there's not a team I'm looking at that I think is better than the Niners top to bottom. And if Jimmy Garoppolo plays the way he did the last couple of weeks, like, who's beating them in a playoff game? There's nobody I'm looking at confidently that I would say would,
Yeah, I think Philly getting Chauncey Gardner-Johnson helps them a ton. He got 10 tackles this week. He's everywhere in the secondary. But I question whether Hurts is going to be upright in December. He's a relatively small guy. He's running at 15 to 20 times a game. He's taking all kinds of punishment. Let's see what he looks like in December. I personally think he's running it too much. I think they're running him too much. They've got a can full of backs. They got a bunch of weapons. Why run Hurts as much as they have? To me, I'm consistent. I don't like running the quarterback between the tackles, whether his name's Trey Lance or Jalen Hurts. So I question whether or not he'll either be upright or if he'll be the Gardner Minshew show, or will he be diminished? But I think it's likely that it's either Gardner Minshew or he's diminished. He's taken a lot of hits. As far as Dallas, I don't think Dallas's run D is up to the snuff. So yeah, Dallas can get you in obvious passing situations. Yeah, they got guys. They got guys that can peel their ears back and go after the quarterback. But I still think you can run on Dallas. And the Niners kind of proved it, and I don't think Dallas is that much better since that point. So that would be my thought. I agree. I think the 49ers are the best team in the conference, and I think it's going to be proven. Couple last ones before we let you go. McCaffrey, with the firing of Matt Rule, there's a lot of Christian McCaffrey trade rumors out there, not necessarily to the 49ers, because I don't know that, A, they need him, nor do they have the money, but sounds like Carolina's willing to kind of dump a bunch of guys, and they've got a bunch of guys that are interesting. I love Brian Burns. I think he's terrific. I love McCaffrey. I even like Terrace Marshall. I think he's kind of an underrated wide receiver. I think he was really good at LSU, and I just think they haven't had the quarterback there to get it out of him. I like DJ Moore, and I like Tommy Tremble. The Carolina's got some talent. What do you think about McCaffrey moving? Do you think there's any chance he will move? And I think the trade deadline's coming up in about a month. What do you think? Is there a player that you're eyeballing or a position that you think John Lynch ought to try to fortify? They don't have a lot of picks, but man, they sure look like they're in that mode where if they were one piece away, you may want to shuffle your cap a little bit and add that piece, because this might be Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch's best shot at a bowl.
It's really hard because in any other year, I would say do what the Rams did last year when they traded a 2 and a 3 for Von Miller. It might be a little bit more for Burns because he's a little bit younger. I think he has one more year of cost control. I think next year's his 5th year option, if I recall correctly. So it might be a 1 and a 2 rather than a 2 and a 3.
I'd take that other kid Haynes too. Marquise Haynes is a nice edge rusher.
Yeah, I think you'd have to do the value played, because as good as I think Brian Burns is, and he's one of my favorite players in the league to watch. I know he's Brad Graham's favorite player of all time. Brad is scouting him and all that. So not to downplay Brian Burns, but is Brian Burns at the cost of a 1st and 2nd round pick that much better than what you're getting from Samson Ebukam and Drake Jackson and Charles Omenihu? I would say no. And I say that also emphatically saying that Brian Burns is one of the best edge rushers in the league. The 49ers are stacked there. To be honest with you, I don't know if they'd be willing to move him or not, but the guy that would really intrigue me is Tremble, because I thought that Tremble would be a very, very interesting piece should the Niners had made the decision to move on from Juszczyk. I think he's somebody who's capable of being that kind of same offensive weapon where you can line him up in the backfield. He can lead block out of the eye. He can line up as a tight end in line. He can kick out to the slot. I've thought for the last couple of years, the tight end position beyond George Kittle has been a little underwhelming. I think what they asked Charlie Warner and like Ross Dwelley to do, they're admirable in their roles and they are capable of doing what they're asked. But man, if you got a guy like Tommy Tremble opposite George Kittle and you have Juszczyk, you have those three guys on the field at the same time, it really opens up what you could do. And I think keeping defenses in that base defense because of the threat of being able to run with those guys blocking and then your ability to turn that into play action, turn that into them. You have Juszczyk running rail routes and that slot fade downfield. Tremble can do a lot of those same things too. So it almost would be like having a Juszczyk and a Juszczyk light on this field at the same time. I don't know if it's feasible, but I definitely think that that's an intriguing thought. And if the cost is, if it's a late round pick, like, why not, man? Like, I would go for it. I think he has a couple years of cost control left too on his rookie deal.
That's interesting. One on the Falcons and then one on Goodell. Goodell over the weekend, of course, the NFL was in London. They had the Giants and the Packers. First time ever that two teams entered a game in London with both having winning records. So the people of London got a nice little treat. They got one of the iconic franchises in the NFL in Green Bay, and they got the New York franchise, and then they got to see an upset with the Giants upsetting the Packers. When Goodell was talking about European expansion this week, he talked about maybe an entire division of teams in Western Europe. And that was the first time I've heard of that. I've heard people suggest that there could be a full-time team in London. Then I've heard them say that there could be a league schedule where every single week of the regular season, there's a game played in London by different teams. So essentially it would be like you could be a London NFL season ticket holder and you would just see all these different teams rolling in. But this is the first time I've actually heard of the fact that the NFL, in his words, is looking around at European markets for a European division, and that he thinks that might work. What do you think? I mean, I can't picture that many American-born collegiate players being open-minded about spending that much time in Dusseldorf or one of these places. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe maybe NFL players would love to live all throughout Western Europe, but that would be my wonder on how viable it is. I know the market's there. I know the fans are there. We know the NFL popularity is soaring. It's probably the most visually compelling entertainment on the planet, to be honest. And that's just my own. Maybe other people would say it's soccer, football, as they say, but I'm going to say it's the NFL. What do you think? Are we going in our lifetime? I mean, heck, they make it sound like it may happen in the next 5 years. Are we going to see an NFL division in Europe?
I think it's really hard. And I think the holdup wouldn't be the players there. I think it would be the owners, because then you're going to have to you're putting 4 teams over there and that pie starts getting split 36 ways rather than 32. And I think that that's the hardest sell, because even with the increase in revenue you'd get, because I had always thought, and been aware that there was a pretty big fan base in Europe. But when I was at the draft in Vegas a few months ago, I had the chance to speak with, a group of people who flew out from Denmark and flew out from England and flew out all the way to Vegas just for the draft. And I'm sure they had some fun doing some other stuff there too. Vegas is a fun place, but their love of American football is so big that not even to watch the sport itself, just to come watch the draft and hang out in that atmosphere, they're willing to make that trek out here to do that. So I think the market's absolutely there. I think honestly, their best bet is moving Jacksonville there. I think that that's something that's been in the works for some time. I think it seems like that's what Shad Khan, the owner, wants. And I think that what you mentioned about having a team there every week, and if they can schedule it so the teams going there are going off of, or they have the bye week coming back when they're coming back stateside, I think it is feasible, because I think that travel on a shorter week or playing, if you travel on Sunday, you come back, like it's a lot to ask. But if you're able to move a team like Jacksonville there and have them be kind of that, they'd have that entire European market to themselves and you'd still have that same revenue sharing the way it's split up now. Because that's the thing I keep coming back to, Larry, is how do you pitch an owner that's getting X amount of dollars a year and tell them that they're going to get less because they want to put a team in, Berlin, or they want to put a team in Paris or something like that. I just don't see, as appealing as it sounds and as cool as the expansion sounds, ultimately Roger Goodell is answering to those 32 owners, and I don't think that they would be on board with something like that.
It'd be interesting to see if they would pay the players anymore. Like, hey, if you're willing to, play and live in Berlin for this year, you'll make 20% more as like in addition to your salary for the quote unquote inconvenience. Tobin Ernst says, here's $1.99 as George Kittle lost some speed. I'll answer that for both of us. I don't think so. I think he's a guy who gets dinged up a lot. And he's taken a lot of hits, but I think his speed's pretty similar to what he entered the league with. If anything, I think he may have worked on his body to the point where he might be a little stronger, faster, quicker than he was coming out of Iowa. All right, last one. Let's look ahead to the Falcons. What's your feeling on the Falcons? Do you think we're going to see Bosa? Do you not think we're going to see Bosa? And give me your thoughts on this matchup. Kyle Pitts is out, so we're not going to see the incredible young tight end, one of the best tight ends in the game. We are going to see Marcus Mariota. We're going to see the former Stanford center Drew Dahlman, who's their starting center now. We're not going to see Ridley because he gambled on the NFL, so his season's done. But we are going to see Drake London, and Drake London has got great ball skills. We're going to see Grady Jarrett, who just had the most questionable late hit on the quarterback or personal foul I think I've ever seen in my life on Tom Brady. That was just a criminally bad call. What's your thoughts of Niners Falcons as we kind of turn the page and look towards week 6?
I think they can't overlook them. I think that they need to, pay them the same respect they would any other opponent. But I'm not the one who has to play the game, so I'll confidently say, that's a game they should have no problem winning. And I don't think that they need to have Nick Bosa dressed at all. I think he needs to be, in street clothes on the sidelines, allow him to rest up. Don't take any chances. If I recall correctly, I think his brother Joey is out with a groin injury right now. And the effects of that, that Chargers pass rush takes a massive hit when, you lose a player like that. The 49ers fortunately have the depth to absorb a loss like that. And I think having a guy like an Ebukam and like a Drake Jackson Drake Jackson, I had Drake London on my mind now that you mentioned him. The depth they have there is enough that you can stomach that loss against a team like the Falcons. And even if they weren't playing Kansas City the next week, even if they were playing the worst team in the league the week after, don't take a chance. So much of your season is riding on having Nick Bosa being healthy down the stretch. Whatever is going on with that groin injury, the tightness, whatever, if it's a small tear or something like that, get it fixed. I do think that Atlanta's a very interesting team because they do, they want to run the football. And I think the 49ers it's incredible, Larry, the way that they've changed their identity the last couple of years, because they were pretty stout against the run that year they went to the Super Bowl, but they are the best team in the league at defending the run now. They're allowing less yards on the ground per game than any team in the NFL. They were allowing less yards per carry than any team in the NFL going into this week. I'd have to double check if that held up after this past game in Carolina. So I think it just gets to a situation where I would bank on them being able to stop the run. I think Algier is getting the majority of snaps at running back with Cordarrelle Patterson out. And I think this game's really just going to come down to, is Marcus Mariota going to be able to consistently move the ball against that secondary and against that pass rush? And while I think that Marcus Mariota has been a little underrated and forgotten and didn't really get the start to his NFL career that I thought he may have deserved, I can't count on him to do that. And I just think that this is a situation where the 49ers should be able to move the ball pretty well. I think that guys like Burford and Banks are going to get a great test against Grady Jarrett, who's up there with the Chris Jones and the DeForest Buckners and the Armsteads and the Donalds as one of the better interior defensive linemen in the league. So that's definitely a matchup to watch. When I think about game previews, I try to envision as many outcomes as possible. And the amount of outcomes I'm envisioning where Atlanta comes away with a win in this one, it's just I'm struggling to do so. So I don't know how you feel about it.
I just think Atlanta's got to be like +2, +3 to win this game. I mean, I think when they're first of all, there's some good-looking young players in their secondary: AJ Terrell, Richie Grant, Jalen Hawkins, the former Cal Bear. They've got some decent young DBs. Grady Jarrett commands a double team up front in their 3-4. He wears 97. He moves exceptionally well for a guy that size. The back that is behind Algier Huntley is a power back. I mean, he's like 230 pounds and he'll move the pile. But the 49ers are so good against the run because their linebackers are so fast. And now Afanga in the box they can bring him off the edge on these blitzes, and he gets home and really impacts the run game. So they got a lot of guys, to beat on that defense. And I just think they're really, really good. As far as I think they'll shut down Algier. I think they'll pretty much shut down Huntley. London got great ball skills. So if you can get up in his face and challenge him and make them throw it over the top, I think you can definitely make some plays on the ball against him. Where he's going to have success is if you get in the red zone and it's short areas, and now he can kind of post up like a basketball player and use his size and his height and his ball skills. So to me, that's, look for him in the red zone. He is absolutely an outstanding young red zone player. And they dodged the bullet not seeing Cordero Patterson and not seeing Kyle Pitts, because this team with Cordero Patterson and Kyle Pitts is quite a bit better than the team that I think the 49ers are going to see on Sunday. So tell us what you got at Niners Nation. What are you covering this week for people who are, who know your stuff and know Niners Nation? Obviously, everybody's familiar with Jordan and what he's doing there. But if they're not familiar with Niners Nation, if they're not familiar with your work, what kinds of things are you writing about this week?
So I'm going to be doing a little bit on, I'm trying to do something every week, Larry, about the offensive and defensive line. I think that there needs to be more discussion about what's going on in the trenches there. So I'm going to be working on something with that over the next couple of days. Tonight, I think I'm going to do something that's just kind of highlighting where the defense is at and, absorbing the loss of Emmanuel Mosley, but also highlighting how they've been to this point, where they're at statistically. I'm, working on cutting up some of the game film from this past game. So I'll highlight some areas where they really stood out. And then just kind of previewing this Falcons game. I'm going to do my best to kind of break down what you can expect with, Arthur Smith and D'Amico Ryan squaring off. And then you got Dean Pease, who feels like he's been in the NFL forever, going up against Kyle Shanahan. Those will be fun matchups to watch. I feel like the matchup between play callers on both teams is going to be almost as intriguing as the actual matchup on the field this week. So I'll go a little bit into what you can expect from Arthur Smith and his offense, Dean Pease and his defense, and how that will translate in their matchup with the 49ers play callers respectively. And I'm thinking about doing a little something about D'Amico, because I'll tell you what, Larry, I haven't gotten all the way through it, but he has been so good with his ability to match up these different pressures. He's showing this mugged double A gap pressure one play, and then the next look, he has them in this NASCAR front, and then in the next front, they're running this fire zone. Like, he's just been, it feels like every single time he's behind the controls, he's pressing the right buttons in the right spots. And it's just, he has such a bright future in this league. And I think that he's somebody, I know as somebody covering the team, and I hope for any fans of the 49ers, watching this team every week, cherish every single moment you have watching him, because as talented as this defense is going to be for years to come, there is absolutely no guarantee that whoever is next in line when he takes a head coaching job is going to be remotely as just exceptional when it comes to, being kind of the maestro of that defense. So I think I want to do something this week about D'Amico Ryans. I'm hoping I can fit that in before this game against Atlanta this weekend.
Yeah, I'm eager to read that. It's funny. I was talking to Charles Omenihu this week, and I was saying, man, when you and Drake Jackson and both these guys kind of commented on the same thing, which was when you can combine the kind of talent that they have, the kind of depth that they have, the motor that they have collectively, by Coach Eric basically saying, play like your hair's on fire, and then, put your hand up and we'll get you off the field. And then you can also play games up front, and you just kind of reference it. These are really well coordinated games. These guys, the TE and the ET stunts, they're very creative, crossing the quarterback's face and using different guys in different alignments. Or I think in this last game, and I have to go back and check it, but I could have sworn in the second half I saw a 4 defensive end line with no defensive tackles.
Are you talking about the one where, so it was, I'm pretty sure, so I posted a little bit ago, it was Bosa and Jackson standing up over
standing up. Yeah, standing up.
I've never seen that from that defense. I had to go back and double check it because I thought I was, it
was 4 defensive ends, and the 2 guys manning the tackle spots were literally standing up. So you had 2 down linemen, 2 guys looking like outside linebackers standing where defensive tackles were. Everybody going after the quarterback because they know they're not playing run because they had a big lead at that point. But when you can play all those games, you got that kind of talent, that kind of speed, that kind of depth. And then you're still sending the Diamador Lenore off the slot on third down, and you're mixing in 5-man rushes and 6-man rushes and overloading sides. There's just so much for an offensive lineman to have to communicate, to digest who's coming, who's dropping, where's the pressure. I mean, you could see they are the last couple of weeks, they've kind of confused these lines, and they've gotten away. They've done some really, really nice things. And the combination of all those things is borderline unstoppable when you've got the kind of talent they have. So I can't wait to read about D'Amico. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think he's going to be an NFL head coach sooner rather than later. All right, great stuff. Hey, you know what? I'll play the commercial, so I'll let you go because I won't want to take any more of your night. But Jordan, love reading your stuff in Niners Nation. Thank you for jumping on the live stream. I know a lot of the Niner fans really appreciate your diligence and your hard work and your intelligence when you're breaking down Niner football. So thanks again for stopping by the Krueg Show, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you there so much. I appreciate it, and thanks to everyone watching. I hope you guys all have a good night.
You too. Jordan Elliot, phenomenal. Does an incredible job. Niners Nation, check him out. Seriously, he does a really, really good job. Kyle Posey, too, for Niners Nation, just does an incredible job. All right, we'll play our sponsors right here, and then we'll come back, check the chat, and get on with the rest of our night on The Krueg Show. Larry Krueger here for Telmetrics. Thanks to Casey Bateman and the good people at Telmetrics. If you're an occupational therapist, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, a chiropractor, a physical therapist of any kind, Telmetrics is designed for you to use in your practice and will greatly benefit your patients. Telmetrics uses computer vision and artificial intelligence and provides a platform for outpatient rehab therapy services, both in the clinical and the telehealth environments. So using Telmetrics can improve your patient's experience and much more. So for all your sports injury needs, or if you're a physical rehabilitation specialist of any kind, make sure you use telmetrics.co, Telmetrix.co. And thanks to Casey Bateman and all the good people at Telmetrics for being a proud sponsor of the Krueg. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dan Coach Emilio. Dan is a buddy, and he is a phenomenal retirement planning specialist. And you can contact him today at securemoney.com, or at his number, 925-628-9966. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world right now, and you want to make sure that your money is secure. That is the key. Danny's got 25 years of experience, born and raised right here in the Bay Area, and he can help you get an immediate 10% premium bonus on your principal retirement account. So give him a call, 925-628-9966. He'll make an appointment with you, and you can sit down. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a deal. He'll consult with you and come up with a strategy to get you going to where you want to be. Once again, 925-628-9966, securemoney.com on the web. And thanks to Tony Cassera and the good people at Cassera's Italian Menswear. They are housing the Krueg Show T-shirts, and they're a proud sponsor of the show as well. The Krueg Show T-shirt, the Krueg Show Podcast T-shirt is available there at their store in Dublin. Their address is 7372 San Ramon Road in Dublin, California. And go see Tony Cassera and get yourself a Krueg Show T-shirt and support the show. And special thanks to our sponsor, New York Style Italian Sausage. That's right, NewYorkStyleSausage.com is their website. Phenomenal product, whether it's the breakfast sausage, the Italian mild, the Italian spicy, the chorizo. You cannot go wrong with New York Style Italian Sausage. Once again, NewYorkStyleSausage.com. Often imitated, never equaled.
We grew up with a Sunday dinner. That means no matter how busy you were, no matter where the hell you were, You came to dinner on a Sunday night. Yeah, Sunday dinner without sausage, it's like a church without God. You know, how can you go to church if you don't believe in God? You know, and along with the sausage also became the discussions. That was discussion night. You know, it wasn't a typical family that you sit there and you're quiet, you know, and you don't talk with a mouthful. Oh no, man. Italians talk when they're eating. Italians even talk when they're sleeping. And definitely we talk with our hands. So if we can't express it through our mouth, through our lips, we express it with our hands. So, and that's what sausage is, really. It's an expression, you know, that life is good.
So New York style sausage was started over 70 years ago. We are the largest producer of fresh Italian sausage on the West Coast.
What makes our sausage in New York style is really the recipe came from back east, from New York, you know, from Connecticut.
If you look at all of our labels, there's maximum 4 or 5 ingredients, which we're really proud of.
There's no preservatives, no MSG, fresh in, fresh out.
The pork comes in fresh, goes out fresh. There's never any freezing throughout the process. We've always used fine quality cuts. We're never gonna deter from that. It's one of the reasons why our sausage is so good. I guarantee you put our sausage up against anybody else's from a flavor standpoint, no one will beat it, hands down.
Hey, do yourself a favor and do me a favor. Go buy a package of the New York style Italian sausage. Guaranteed you will love it, guaranteed.
Coming down the home stretch on the Krueg Show. Thanks again to Jordan Elliot for stopping by today. Thanks to all of you. If you are in the chat, hit like and subscribe, and you can be alerted by phone anytime we are going live on a live stream. And we do this, I wouldn't know. I mean, every day, every week's a little different, but I would say, you know, between 5 and 10 times a week, we're doing live streams. We'll do stuff with the Niners. We'll do stuff with the Giants. We'll follow the Giants offseason story. We're going to follow Warrior basketball. Can't get enough of this Draymond Green story. Hope you enjoyed me today. By the way, I was on 95.7 The Game sitting in for Ray Ratto with Damon Bruce. Check me out tomorrow and Friday. Tomorrow and Friday, both from 3 to 6 p.m. I'll be on with Damon Bruce on 95.7 The Game, talking about all the topics of the day. We'll talk, I think tomorrow Peter King is on, so that's going to be a really cool show. So check that out tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And then I'll take Wednesday and Thursday off, and then I'll join Damon again on Friday. And also this week, Wednesday and Thursday, the great Vish Kumaran and I are going to be starting our back and forth where we're going to be on each other's channels once a week. So I'm not sure who's going first. It'll be Wednesday on the Krueg Show channel and Thursday on his channel, or Thursday on the Krueg Show channel and Wednesday on his channel. But this week, both Wednesday and Thursday, Vish and I are going to get together on his channel and on this channel and talk a little Niner football. So I love Vish. Vish is phenomenal, and he's really great to talk to. And so we get a couple of hits with Vish later on this week. In fact, MF says, I love Vish. Everybody loves Vish. Eli Bronstein says, good job, Larry. Thank you, Eli. Jaguayo56 donates $2. Says, must focus on Atlanta. Mariota's running that offense well. That's a good point. Jaguayo, good to see you in the chat. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, the Niners have to, if they think this is going to be a laydown, think again. Mariota's playing well. This is an NFL team, and you can lose any of these games for sure. And the 49ers are rolling in a little banged up, to be completely honest. So that's part of it as well. Eli says, good job. I think I already read that one, but Bobby Mira says, Mitch Wishnowski. He says Vishnowski. I get you. I get you. Mitch Vishnowski for Vish. I got you, Bobby. I see you working. Dusty Gold says, saw Vish's new channel. Nice. That's right. Vish is out there and doing his thing and doing it well. All right. I'll never do that again, but he is going to stop by Wednesday and Thursday. We will chop it up. So catch me tomorrow on The Game at 3:00 with Damon Bruce and Peter King. Catch me Friday on The Game at 3:00 with Damon Bruce, and I'm not sure who else. And then listen to all my buddies over there at The Game. Saw Guru and Steiny today, Bonte and Shasky, of course, Willard and Dibbs. Ray's taking a little vacation this week, but good guys over there. And when I'm not on, I'm still listening to 95.7 The Game. So Eli says, loving your channel. Thank you, Eli. We do appreciate that. We're enjoying doing the channel and having the channel on a regular basis. And, we were doing Niner interviews every week, and we're bringing that to the channel as well. The YouTube channel is blowing up with a bunch of different things. So over 7,000 subscribers. Thanks to all of you. We're probably going to have a couple new sponsors here in the next week or two that we're going to introduce. Check out my stuff on MyBookie as well. So a lot of good stuff in the mix for the Krueg Show. All right, that's going to do it for us. Let's see. We also have this one from Jaguayo. He says $2. Jordan Elliot and yourself always give us legit info. Yeah, I mean, Jordan's really good. He is really good. And, I love talking Niner football with everybody. Jack Hammer's terrific. You just name it. I mean, they're all good, really. Grant's good. Jack's good. Vish is terrific. Love talking ball with my guys, Ryan and Danny. And then of course all the Niner people that we talk to and different, one of the guys I'm trying to catch up with this week. And because I worked with him in the Canadian League when I was doing quality control for the defense in the Canadian League with the Sacramento Gold Miners, our quarterback at the time was the great David Archer, who was a star quarterback at Iowa State and played a number of years in the NFL as a backup. He played for the Sacramento Surge and I think was the MVP of the World Bowl in the early 90s. And then I was with him in Sacramento when we were in the Canadian League for the Sacramento Gold Miners. And now David is the color analyst for the Atlanta Falcons. So today I saw his name in the black book when I was dialing around. And I'm like, wow, David Archer. So unfortunately, the number for the Odyssey Atlanta station in the black book did not necessarily bring me right to him. So I'm going to have to really chase down his number tomorrow. But I can't wait to get him on the show because Archer's a great guy, terrific football mind. I'm sure we'll have a lot of interesting things to say about playing quarterback, whether it be Marcus Mariota, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance. And I'm really interested to hear his perspective on Niners Falcons and to just catch up with a guy who, I knew as a young man. I was only 23 years old when I worked for the Sacramento Gold Miners, and my nickname was "Fuck You, Larry." I'm not even joking. But we had a lot of good times. We had a lot of fun, and it would be great. It would be great to get David Archer on the show and talk Niners and Falcons with the great David Archer. Dusty Gold says, I remember Archer, Larry. Yeah, David was a good player, and he played for a number of NFL teams, and he played, I believe, after he left the Gold Miners, he played for the Texans in San Antonio. He played for Ottawa, the Rough Riders, played for Edmonton, I believe, had a full career in the NFL as a backup, had a full career in the CFL as a starter in the World League. Really good guy, really good family guy, and now the voice of the Falcons, or one of the voices of the Falcons. He works with West Durham. So hopefully we'll catch up with David Archer if I can track his number down somehow, some way. Bobby says, thanks, Larry. Always good stuff. What do we got? This one. Stay Greasy says, you should interview JV. Am I not thinking, who's this JV? Anybody? I don't know who JV is. Maybe somebody can throw that in the chat. But anyway, thanks to everybody who participated in the chat today, and it's always fun. It's always fun to talk Niner football. And Jordan, as I mentioned before, Jordan's I think really up and coming. He's phenomenal. He does a lot of good stuff. I've been reading his stuff. I read his stuff every week. He always brings something to the table that's uniquely insightful. Jason Verrett. You know what? It's funny. I actually went up to JV the other day in the locker room and said, "Hey, man, would love to have you on the show." And he said, "Sure." But he was getting treatment and he's trying to nurse himself back to the field. And Kyle Shanahan kind of said it today. He basically said, "Hey, JV's an awesome corner." He's, I don't know if he said Pro Bowl, but I think he knows. I think everybody who knows football knows that Jason Verrett, when healthy, has Pro Bowl caliber traits. Incredible change of direction, incredible footwork, incredible balance, great tenacity, great knowledge of the position. But he's also had ACLs and Achilles tears and lots and lots of injuries. So hopefully he's over those injuries. He's going to get an opportunity to step in for Mosley whenever JV is ready to roll. He's going to get that run because he's an established guy in this league for sure. And then the Niners could, my old buddy who used to talk to me about coverage said, "You know what the key to pass coverage is, Krueg?" And I said, "What?" He said, "The key to pass coverage is pass coverage." In other words, there is no goddamn key to pass coverage. You got to have guys. You got to have dudes. You got to have guys who can cover. There is no key. There is no shortcut. You just got to have bodies. And unfortunately, the Niners lost a really good one in Emmanuel Mosley. All right. That does it for us. Have a great rest of your night. And check us out later this week on The Krueg Show.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to hassle. Yeah, we ain't never fall back.